My name is Elaine Sayre, and I'm an art teacher at Lisbon High School. I started the art program here about 18 years ago, and we've always had a clay program. It's an area that I really enjoy working in myself personally. The video you will see is working on the potter's wheel. It's a very basic demonstration how to make a bowl on the potter's wheel. I like working on the wheel because you can really get a variety of forms, and from those forms you can really go anywhere. You can chop them up, you can put them together in different ways. It's a whole other art form, and this is a really basic introduction to that. I'm also going to show you how to trim a pot after you've thrown it on the wheel, which I think is an important step. Okay, I'm going to be doing a demonstration on working on the potter's wheel. It'll be a demonstration of the basic form that you can make on the wheel, the basic tools, and also trimming the pot after it's made. First thing you do, it doesn't matter what you're doing in clay, what method you're using, it's really important to get your clay wedged. And you do that by using the palm of your hands, and you twist the clay, kind of folding it back into itself, but twisting it a little bit, because the reason for doing this is to get rid of air bubbles. And if you didn't do that little twist, you'd be locking the air back in, which is what you want to avoid, because when you work on the wheel, those little air bubbles will end up feeling like little stones or something. And you want to try to get rid of those before you even start. Now once you have it wedged, kind of put it in a round form. Before you start on the wheel, you want to gather some basic tools. And those are a wire tool for trimming the pot, a rib tool to really help form it, and a trimming tool to trim the edge of the pot after you've thrown it, and a needle tool for various purposes, a bucket of water, and a sponge. Little piece of newspaper for smoothing the edge. Often people will use chamois or pieces of leather, but you really don't need that. A little piece of newspaper is perfect. You want to start by getting your clay hooked up to the wheel head. This wheel head has a bat. There are screws that hold it on, but this is not a necessity. It's something that you would use if you were working very large and you wanted to have a way to pick up the pot without actually touching it. I'm going to leave it on the wheel, but when I go to take the pot off, I will show you how you can just cut it off the wheel head without the bat. Now the first thing is to get your clay onto the wheel head, and you just take your fingers, dip it in the bucket of water, and just touch the center of your wheel a little bit. You don't need a lot of water. And then you actually throw the clay and aim for the center. Don't be too concerned if it doesn't end up right in the middle, because as you're working it will move towards the center. First step, it's called centering. And it's probably the most important step working on the wheel. If this is your first time on the wheel, you may just get your clay centered, and that might be it for the first time, and that's okay. You really want to learn how to center the clay. Once it's centered, then you can go anywhere with that cylinder, that basic form. But I'm going to show you techniques that I've learned over the years. Every time I watch a potter, I pick up other techniques, so this I'm just going to share with you the method I've put together. But please, you know, try other ways. They often will work. Wet your hands. You always want your clay sliding under your hands. And the first thing is to keep your elbows in while you're working. That helps center the clay. You want to wet the clay and actually squeeze it and bring it up into like an upside down ice cream cone. And then you compress it. You push down and you push in at the same time. Rinse your hands, because you just want that clay sliding under your hands. Rinse your hands when it starts to feel sticky. And once again, I'm pushing down really hard. You can tell when it's centered because you can feel it. Often, you know, students will ask me, is my clay centered? And I really almost have to put my hands on the clay to see if it's centered, because if it's centered, it won't wobble. And sometimes it looks centered and it isn't. So it's really worth taking the extra time to really get it really in the middle of that wheel head. In between trying to center it, keep pulling it up into that cone form. Now obviously, the more clay you have, the more difficult this step will be. So the first few times you work on the wheel, you may want to just kind of not go much larger than this to kind of start out with. Keep your hands rinsed. Once again, you're pushing down and you're pushing in. Your elbows are in, because if they're out, you're all over the place. You want to stay centered. If you're centered, your clay will get centered. And keep your hands rinsed. As soon as you feel them getting sticky, rinse them. So this first step is called centering. If you lose a little bit of clay on the edge, ignore it. Don't try to gather it back up and put it in that centered section, because it's just going to create air bubbles, and you can trim that off later. It's not an issue at all. Okay, once it's centered, the next step is to start to open it up. You do that with your elbows in. You cup your hands around the clay and you go in with your thumb. Obviously, you can only go so far with your thumb, so you switch to these two fingers and continue going down. Right now, you're just doing the depth. So you kind of have to guess where the bottom of this is. And you want to stop before you get to where you really want it to be and measure it. So you've cupped your hands, you're going in with your thumb. Rinse your hands. Continue with the fingers. When you get the depth, widen it a little bit. I'm just using the tip of my fingers and I'm pulling them across. Now I'm going to use my sponge and just kind of dry that out a little bit because there's water in there, and I'm going to measure the bottom. Stop your wheel when you go to do this, because if you don't, you're going to mangle the bottom of your pot. Take your needle, go in, you're going to hit the wheel head, put your finger where that ends. This is how thick the bottom is. This is thicker than I want it. So I want to go back and take out about that much more, about half of that amount. And then open it up and widen it. And right now, I'm really determining what size the bottom of this will be. This will be a bowl, and I'm determining that at this point. I'm going to rinse my hands. Don't worry about the hole that the needle created, because that'll fill right in. Now I'm widening it. Because I can reach the bottom very easily now, I'm going to go ahead and smooth it out with the sponge. Notice my elbows are still in. When you're working on the wheel, keep your elbows in. It really will make a huge impact on your results. If they're out here, everything is all over the place. Rinse your hands. Now I'm going to start pulling up the wall. And I'm going to do that with my knuckle on my right hand and the two fingers on the opposite hand, and then I'm going to hook up my hands with my thumb. And I'm just going to compress. Everything is going to happen between my knuckle and my fingers. And I'm going to compress the clay and pull up. And that'll stretch the clay and thin it. And I want to go ahead and wet the wall so my hands will just slide over it. And I just hold my sponge on the edge of the pot and squeeze it to let the water out. I'm rinsing my hands so they're wet, my elbows are in, and I'm going to go ahead and do the knuckle and the fingers and pull up the wall. If it gets dry in the middle of a pull, continue the pull. Finish the pull, even if you lighten up a little bit. That's all right. But finish the pull. Rinse your hands, and every once in a while between pulls, compress your clay. Just pull it back in a little bit, because when you pull the wall, if you keep pulling it out, 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 it'll collapse because it'll be way out. So you want to kind of keep pulling it in. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull the wall again because I want it thinner than this. So I'm going to wet it. Once again, elbows in, my knuckle and my fingers are working opposite each other, and I'm pulling up the wall. Notice the speed of the wheel. I start to slow it down a little bit when I start pulling the wall. I'm going to take the sponge, take the water out of the middle. If you leave the water in the middle, it'll just disintegrate the bottom of your pot. So you want to keep removing the water even though you keep adding it on. Compress it a little bit. at this point, you want to trim the top because we're not machines. The pressure will be a little bit uneven, so this top edge will be uneven. So what you want to do, I'm bracing my elbow on my knee, and I'm just going to go in with the needle tool, and after it's gone all the way in, I'm going to catch it on the other side in the middle with the tip or the side of my finger, and then I'm going to pick it up after it's cut all the way through, just to get the top even. I'm going to hold the edge between my fingers and compress it a little bit. And this time when I pull, I'm really going to start thinking about the form. I have the basic cylinder. When you work on the wheel, you're working with a cylinder. And then it's up to you which way you want to go. At this point, this could be compressed and made into a bottleneck. It could be pulled out into a bowl. I mean, it's endless what you can do with this basic form. I'm going to do the bowl. I'm going to pull it out and just kind of shape it into a bowl. I'm wetting the wall, rinsing my fingers, and I'm going to go ahead and pull it out gently. You don't want to force the clay, just a little bit at a time. Take the water out of the middle. I'm going to hold the sponge on the outside. Some people like to leave the throw marks, some people like to smooth them out. It really depends, it's whatever you like. I'm going to leave them at the bottom and just pull this out a little bit more to make a bowl that comes out a little bit. And this is where your sponge, once again, you're taking the water out. This is where this rib comes in. These come in metal and wood. I prefer the wood just because it's smoother on the clay. And you can make these. This is one that I actually made. And you can make them with teeth. You can do anything really to impact whatever it is that you're making. So I'm just holding it against the edge of the clay and I'm bending it to kind of get it unified. And I think, whoops, I'll leave a little ridge. I'm going to get that out of there. And I'm going to trim this again just to get it even. And I'm going to wait until it's cut all the way through before I pick up. Often people will be a little nervous about this and they will just get it halfway through and they try to pick up and it rips the pot. So try to really make sure it's gone all the way through. I'm going to hold the edge and compress it a little bit. And also at this point, I'm going to trim the bottom because there's extra clay down there, which I don't need. It's going to make this bowl heavy if I leave some of the extra clay at the bottom. And I probably won't use it if it's heavy, because if it's in the cupboard and it's heavy to use, I won't want to use it. So trim off that extra clay. It's a waste of clay and you don't need it. This is a trimming tool. It's like a knife, but it's made out of wood. When you use this, hold it tightly, okay? Keep your elbows, and once again you hold it because the pot sometimes tends to want to grab this and it'll cut into your project. So hold it. Once again, I'm bracing my arm on my knee and I'm going to cut it, and I'm just turning the wheel head and I'm going to wait until it hits the top. And after you've cut it, kind of tilt this away from the pot a little bit so it'll be easier to clean it up. Take your needle tool, whoops, thank you. Take your needle tool, hold it on the bat, trim this off, stop your wheel, cut through it, peel this off. It's a lot easier to take it off using this needle. Hold your sponge to the wheel head, and I'm going to clean this a little bit. Not for neatness, it's so I can get this pot off easily. I'm also going to hold it to the bottom of the pot because I don't necessarily want that cut line to be there because it does nothing for the pot. So I'm going to go ahead and smooth that out a little bit. The other thing I want to do before I get this off is this edge is sharp, and if I leave it like this, it's apt to chip. If it's on a cup, it's apt not to be comfortable to drink out of because when this gets fired, it will be sharp. So I'm going to take a little piece of newspaper. Like I mentioned earlier, people use leather. Newspaper works great, and it's always around. You just wet it, you fold it, and you hold it over the edge and just smooth out that edge. You can do it a couple times if you need to, and that's it. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to trim this off. Obviously, because it's on a bat, you could lift up the whole bat to take it off, but I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to cut it off just to demonstrate how you can actually cut it off if you don't have one of those bats. Put water on one side of your pot, take your wire tool, thumbs down on the wire, and you pull the water right through under the pot. Make sure your thumbs are down on the wire, because I've seen many people at this point come up and cut through the middle of their pot because they don't have their thumbs down on the wire. So that's a very important step to do. Also, scrap plexiglass is wonderful to put projects on because it doesn't warp. Put a little bit of newspaper between your pot and the plexiglass so it doesn't stick to the plexiglass. And then you just make 2 V's, give it a little bit of a twist, and then you put it on the board. So a little bit of a twist, put it on there. And those are the basic steps to actually constructing the pot. Okay, the next step I'm going to show you is trimming a pot on the wheel. And it's an important part of working on the wheel. You really want to finish your piece. And what you do is you allow your pot to dry until it's leather hard and it can be handled without being distorted. And you put it back on the wheel upside down and you recenter it. And you can do that by eye, but really the best way to really do it is by turning your wheel a little bit. And this is the tool you're going to need. It's a trimming tool. It's a rib tool. And you reattach it with clay. And you want it fairly soft because you don't want to distort your pot. And you start your wheel. And once again, your elbows are in. You try to center it. And you do that by extending one finger. And wherever your finger hits, you know that's the part that you need to move towards the center just a little bit. So it's hitting right here, so I'm going to move that just a hair, hardly at all. Do it again. People who, professional potters who do this for a living forever, have a way of just tapping them into place. And because I don't do this every day, it's not really a skill that I've developed, but it's really neat to watch people that are able to do that. That towards the middle a little bit, and we're just about there. Take the time to do this step, because if you've centered your pot, you want to trim it centered, because if you don't, it's going to be off. Just make a large coil and attach it. And if you remember when we were centering the clay to make the pot, we had the wheel going fairly fast. Well, it's the same thing with centering, with trimming. You want your wheel to be going fairly fast. Also, it's kind of good to get a sense of the sound. It's almost like a drum. And if it starts to sound really loud and really hollow, you probably want to ease up and not trim too much more. And what I'm going to do when I trim, I'm going to leave a little ridge so that when I go to glaze it and the glaze runs, it'll catch it. So hopefully it won't end up on the kiln shelf. The other thing I'm going to go for is I'm going to trim the middle a little bit lower than the sides, because I want this bowl to sit flat. I don't want it to be rocking. So I'm going to start in the middle and just kind of trim it. And you can use the sharp edge or the round. It doesn't matter really which end of the tool. It's whatever works for you. Most of the time you don't really need to take a lot off, but it's just a really nice finish that I think is an important step if you're going to work on the wheel, to really finish it on the wheel. Now obviously if you have a form that's like a bottleneck or something, you won't be able to put it back on the wheel unless you have what's called a chuck. And it's a hollow cylinder that you would actually put your pot inside of and attach it. But you could also trim it by hand. But once again, you can hear now it sounds a little more hollow. And at this point you would also sign your name and take it off, and that's it. Thank you.